Welcome, everybody. I have the honor of introducing our next speaker, and forgive me, I'm going to look on my iPhone here because he sent me a couple emails over the last few days, and it's written so well and it's so concise, I'm not going to try to paraphrase, but rather just read this interesting note he sent me. Rand says, basically, I'm going to present some ideas for ways that the OER movement can attend more to the learning and instruction side of openness. I'll offer some things to keep in mind so we don't end up with the ironic situation of having too many open resources that reinforce a closed, less than effective instructional model. The alternative I'll present, based on a couple of decades of work on cognitive flexibility theory and learning environments based on that theory, has lots of specific recommendations for ways to structure random access materials to help learners to develop the ability to generate novel applications of their prior learning in a situation adaptive manner. Now bear with me just for a second. Oh, am I supposed to talk into this? Okay. That's okay. Just a short bit on Rand's bio. Dr. Rand Sparrow is a professor of educational psychology at the Educational Technology at Michigan State University. Before coming to MSU, he was the Distinguished Senior Scholar in the College of Education at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where he's Professor of Ed Psych at the Beckman Institute for Advanced Science and Technology. He's been a visiting scientist at the Psychology and Computer Science departments at Yale University, where he worked in the Yale Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, and a visiting prof at Education at Harvard University. Founding member and served as a one-time co-director at the National Center for the Study of Reading at Illinois. He also served as the chair of the Department of Ed Psych at the University of Illinois, and the bio goes on for another 5 or 6 screens. A very impressive resume. I'm not going to read it all. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Rand Sparrow.
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, I'm an emissary from an other world here. I'm new to the OER community. I'm a cognitive scientist and educational psychologist, and I first of all just want to say what a pleasure it is to be here. I'm something of a convert. I do believe in what you're all doing, and I have, for my whole professional career, valued openness of various kinds. The kind of openness, though, that I've dealt with has not had as much to do with the availability of materials as the kinds of knowledge, representations, understandings, and all that would be open to application in a wide variety of situations, helping people, as the wonderful keynote speaker yesterday morning talked about, to achieve the purpose in education of getting learners to be able to think for themselves. My impression, as I learn more about the work you do, is there is a lot of content that's coming into play on one hand, and very little attention to whether that open content is promoting various kinds of cognitive openness rather than perhaps, as Cable said in the introduction, putting us in the somewhat ironic situation of opening up lots of resources that reinforced an old closed model of learning that is not as effective as we need it to be in this time of rapid change and increasing complexity. I've argued in the column I write for Educational Technology magazine called The New Gutenberg Revolution that kids growing up in nonlinear random access digital environments are actually learning to think in a radically different way, perhaps even more different than all the kinds of qualitative changes that theorists and researchers identified with the Gutenberg revolution. A major evolutionary change in the species, perhaps. We now have new media that can make possible a new cognitive message. We have kids who are used to learning in a nonlinear way, and as we all know, as I was just saying to John, so pardon me for saying this again, the world doesn't go in a line, the world isn't organized into chapters, and we always wonder about why we have the transfer problem. People acquire things in school and then can't apply it to new situations. Well, now we can cut out the middleman, or middle person, I should say, and have kinds of learning that I'll be talking about in a little bit that actually follow the contours of the knowledge landscapes to which we have to eventually apply our knowledge, ergo a solution to the transfer problem. Cognitive flexibility theory, the theory I've been developing over the last 20, 25 years or so, and used to generate various kinds of learning environments that produce open rather than closed learning in ill-structured domains. Ill-structured domains being those in which there's enough variability from one situation to the next that you can't have a prepackaged prescription for how to think and act that you retrieve from memory and apply as a kind of template and one-size-fits-all way across situations. Instead, what you have to be able to do is read the new situation carefully, see the complexity that's there, and then assemble bits and pieces of knowledge and experience acquired at different times to put together what you might call a schema of the moment to fit the new situation that you're encountering. I won't go into detail on the various learning environments built. I'll show a little bit of one really fast, but the point isn't buy CFT. I'm not here to sell CFT. I'm here to make some suggestions about some parameters, some criteria that you might want to pay attention to on this other hand. You know, we had this on the one hand, lots of open resources. On the other hand, not much attention to what things we should be looking at in order to assign them value for openness as representative of, again, a kind of open learning and instruction philosophy or ethos. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of an idea about what some of these kinds of openness are, and you know, coincidentally, I just published a chapter in a book last year, which you can find at my website, cogflextheory.org, along with a bunch of other things called Modes of Openness in Cognitive Flexibility Hypertext, and and I think I list something like 30 or so kinds of cognitive openness and readiness for transfer, new situations, dealing with complexity, and so on, embedded in these systems. So, of course, I'm only going to be able to scratch the surface here, but one of the important points is we have to, when we start talking more about the content side with respect to learning and instruction features, we have to be specific. We have to, you know, make specific recommendations so that people can either build them into these resources that are going to become open, or in ways I hope I'll have time to talk about, be able to overlay metadata, other kinds of things on the systems we already have that are already built to alter from a sort of closed philosophy to a more open one. Okay, so what is this? And I'm only going to, this is, okay. So I'm going to talk really fast, like I've been talking, while I go through this, and then I'm going to become a person like you hardly know and just start talking really quietly and going back and forth with you, and taking a bunch of questions, hopefully getting a dialogue going. But I wanted to lay out some of these criteria. I don't in each case say why a particular feature, and these are just a selection out of many more features, is a kind of openness, but feel free to ask. They all relate to one or another kind of important cognitive openness. And these are, of course, self-contained systems. One of the things I'd like you all to know, who may have been following some of my work in the past, is I'm not building kind of proprietary systems at $1 million or $2 million a shot for whoever is giving me money anymore. All my work now is moving towards using what's out there on the web and harnessing that. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the really good results we're finding with learners using Google to study grand social challenges, using an opening kind of mindset rather than the typical Google mindset of finding an answer, and putting themselves in the driver's seat, not following Google lists or pre-compiled links, but rather organically, reciprocally, in a kind of yin-yang way, if you will, seeing what the web is showing them and then refining their search queries as a result, in a very rapid kind of interaction that produces very deep knowledge very fast. We're getting great results with that, and all of these kinds of things have been tested in the ways you like to test for the kinds of educational outcomes I think we all most value, things like transferability to apply knowledge in a situation different from the conditions of initial learning. This just happens to be one of the more recent ones supported by the National Science Foundation. We wanted to get teachers to be able to get up the learning curve as quickly as possible. By the way, I call this latest incarnation of CFT systems experience acceleration support environments, and I can talk, if you would like, about why they are able to accelerate experience in the way they do. But we don't have time for reading comprehension teachers to spend a year, 2 years, or experts, or people in any domain, the typical 10 years to become experts. So what we wanted to do is to get them to learn a technique that Anne-Marie Palinsar and Ann Brown developed called reciprocal teaching. And so we had Anne-Marie, along with somebody doing questioning the author, another strategy. We got a lot of video and worked with pairs and sometimes 3 at a time teachers collaborating, working with the system, and the data showed they got up the experience curve and being able to apply their knowledge really quickly. But okay, so what are some of the kinds of openness you want to be looking for? Well, first of all, a system should have conceptual variability. So if you look at, say, an important theme of reading comprehension, and in particular reciprocal teaching, you have scaffolding. All right. When we started out, the teachers, they're saying to each other, well, what's the definition of scaffolding? The server error processing your... Well, that's an interesting development. Okay, so I'm going to do this in pantomime. All right. So, and some of you have seen this system, so you know it works. Chris, sorry, by the way, Chris Geith is also listed with me from MSU Global, and she's going to be coming in the last 10-15 minutes and sort of asking some questions and helping to lead the discussion. Well, this was working just before. So what you get, let's just put on another one. Well, nothing is, the server may be down.
Do you have a live web connection to Brian's stuff?
Well, that's not going to illustrate the points. Okay. All right, so what I was going to show. First, a bunch of video clips come up that actually maybe I can show you at least some of the formats. Video clips come up showing like 10, 15, 20 different examples of scaffolding. You know, I did this in my room at the hotel, and it worked.
I'd say the odds are high that it's a problem with the network here.
Oh, here we go. Here's some. Well, you know, basically, so would the, is it working again now? Yeah, all right, go figure. So anyway, these are all clips, lots of clips that show scaffolding. 5 minutes looking at different examples of scaffolding and comparing them. And one thing we do is we work a lot with four-way comparisons. It's another kind of opening up. Looking at things just one way, people overgeneralize from cases as if they were prototypes. Even pairwise comparisons can be reductive. We find there's a lot of power in A is kind of like B, but different from C. These are all real-world examples. You can see it's real easy to slot these things in. That'll go in the first quadrant. We'll look at this one and put that in the fourth quadrant, put this one in the second quadrant, and this one. And we're not going to put any sound on this, and it's easy to shuttle them in and out. So right away, instead of thinking there is some closed definition of scaffolding that's going to guide their performance, they got 4, 5, 6, 7 quick illustrations. And right away they see it's kind of similar, kind of different. There's a family resemblance, and their mindset changes from a kind of closed conceptual notion to one that's open and context dependent in the way these concepts are actually used in the world. So conceptual variability is one thing they see right away. And again, you know, they do a lot of shuttling things in and out and playing these videos. They all have their own play bars and so on. Within around a half an hour, looking at some key concepts of reciprocal teaching, like scaffolding, they were already thinking differently about what it means to apply that concept in actual conditions of real-world practice, because again, in ill-structured domains, they vary one to the next. All right, so opening up beyond definitions. But also, ideas aren't located in separate chapters and so on. Some cases illustrating scaffolding, others illustrating something else. What we get people to be able to do very quickly is to combine these concepts, so you can take scaffolding and say, well, how does that happen differently at early stages of learning for a reader versus later stages? And so we might look at the pacing, how pacing interacts, and then you get a smaller set of examples. And basically what people start doing is treating this as a kind of combinatorial idea playground, where they can come up with different hypotheses about how ideas combine in actual conditions of application. In ill-structured domains, you can't generalize from the actual cases. That's what makes them ill-structured. What you have to be able to do is work with the family resemblances, work with concepts to help you to understand the cases, rather than cases being just illustrations of wide application concepts. So, very quickly in these systems, you start to see that things happen differently as you change circumstances, combine ideas in different ways, and you can test them out against the actual what happened in the cases, and then go on to by the way, there's all kinds of indexes, so you can get back and see those again. And very quickly, they are doing things like building visual essays.
And is this example openly available on the web without
Yeah.
password?
No, it needs a password because of IRB approval issues. Just send me an email note. I'll send you the password, and you're on. I promise I would limit it to educational people, which whatever that means. I'd have to. But basically, I give it to anybody who asks, as long as no clips were selected. Got to select the clips. So just. So they might have. So one thing we asked them to do is to write an essay about scaffolding. You know, visual essay that shows ways in which you can find surprising similarities and surprising differences. A powerful exercise we developed in ill-structured domains. Surprising similarity is, instances of scaffolding that look different on the surface. Different moves are being made by the teachers and the students, and yet clearly they're making a similar point about scaffolding. Surprising differences, things that look similar moves being made by the teachers and students, and yet they are illustrating important, subtly different aspects of scaffolding. And so, yeah, you just click the ones you want, and type in the things you want, and whatever. Save the changes, and you've got a shareable visual essay that has the text we just wrote and a series of video clips you can present. The first one might say, well, we selected this one because it's similar to the next one, whatever way. So in other words, they're playing around with the knowledge, testing it against actual instances. They are also, I should say, working with one or two more quick CFT things, and then I'll have a corpus of things to talk about from the perspective of how you might want to start evaluating and building upon existing open educational resources. CFT systems, our metaphor following something Wittgenstein said in the preface to his philosophical investigations is crisscrossing a landscape of knowledge in lots of different directions. It's always been a non-linear learning theory for reasons of promoting transfer in ill-structured domains. A crossroads case is a case which has typicality. It's not an atypical case, but it teaches a lot of lessons. So now you watch, a 3-minute, 4-minute video, and what you're getting is a kind of a synecdoche, a world in a grain of sand. I've sometimes said the only way you can see a world is in a grain of sand. If you try to see too much at once, you get overwhelmed, but sometimes you can get a good microcosm of a larger macrocosm teaching many of the lessons. Side benefit is, so once you've seen this case that takes 3 or 4 minutes a couple of times to teach different lessons, after that you shift to epitomes mode. You're watching 10 seconds at a time. Remember those quadrants? People are bouncing little 10-second clips off of each other at the speed of light. We even have a larger array where, like a conductor, you take these cases that are already overlearned, highly familiar, you don't have to see all of, and you're accelerating experience because you are bouncing a bunch of 10-second cases off each other really rapidly, establishing the kinds of multiple connections along multiple dimensions that are needed to begin to approximate the complexity of the world you're trying to apply your knowledge to. All right, so I just mentioned a few features, but okay, so now when you're looking at open resources and evaluating them for the quality of the learning and instruction philosophy they're embedding as to whether it's producing open rather than closed learning, you start saying, okay, is it applying multiple perspectives? is it breaking units down into small enough grain size so that recombinability becomes possible? If not, then you may want something like clip marks or other or newer software that can allow you to take what's already there in large chunks and therefore can't easily be recombined, reassembled to fit new situations. And you're doing your multi-dimensional tagging off of just those smaller segments. That's the kind of thing you might want to add on if it hasn't already been built with it. If you don't do that, the system becomes closed in a variety of ways that comes along with too large a monolithic structure. So small pieces are more movable. If you try to combine large chunks, you end up with something like Picasso faces with the nose going this way and the eyes going that way. You get more fidelity to the situation you're facing if you're working with smaller pieces. You'll notice that, though I didn't spend a lot of time talking about it, I did address the question at various points about mindset. You have to change the way people think. They're prefigurative schemas. They're worldviews that determine what kinds of schemas they build. We've got lots of data in my lab about how people oversimplify important kinds of complexity in domains like medicine. It's a kind of conspiracy of convenience, I called it in an impolitic moment earlier in my career. Easier for the teachers to teach, easier for the learners to learn, easier for the textbook writers to write their text and the test makers to develop, grade, and so on their tests, except the world isn't cooperating in this conspiracy. They get out in the world and it's a lot messier. Instead of there being a single answer, a single best perspective, a single best prototype, you need to have multiple perspectives, multiple prototype examples that you assemble, taking aspects that apply to the situation, discarding those that don't apply so well. You need to switch from a mindset of compartmentalization, chapterization, decomposition, linear separability, and so on, to one of non-additivity, interconnectedness. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Concepts in context are affected by that context. That's why all of our teaching comes in the context of actual cases, and then the concepts have to configure themselves as best they can within those cases. So again, if your open materials are in an ill-structured domain, to what extent is learning taking and instruction taking place at too abstract a level? In ill-structured domains, they are ill-structured because those abstractions don't account for enough of the variability. So I don't know, I could go on and on with this, and probably give you in this paper I'm writing after having been inspired by interacting with all of you. I've got a list now of around 30 different things you'd want to have on this list of criteria for learning and instruction openness to go along with openness on what's the side of what's available. So we're paying a bit more attention to that as well, and avoiding the ironic situation where, again, we're reinforcing these old ways of teaching by making them open. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is just say very quickly, these grand social challenge areas we're working in now, healthcare, climate change, a whole bunch of them, very hard to learn traditional ways, climate change, the individual psychology, economics, the science, the politics. We've got people learning on the web really, really quickly, really deeply, doing this. I got papers at my website, more coming. Don't hesitate to get in touch with me at rspiro@msu.edu if you're not finding what you're looking for. real world complexity, new world of life and work, where people who can't adapt their knowledge to new circumstances aren't going to be able to get a job. Luckily, we might have the right new medium with kids who have the mindset that is really attuned to this very different kind of way of learning that actually fits the way we want our knowledge to be applied in a messy, complex, not well-structured world. Okay, could have said a lot more. Chris is going to have a few questions since she knows you so much better than I do, and then some questions from the rest of you. And thanks for your patience. Go ahead, Chris. Here you go.
All right, I want to thank Rand for coming here, sharing his expertise. Rand came to me. My group at MSU creates new online programs, among other things, product suites for all the different colleges, and we work in the theme areas of food and healthcare and sustainability. And he came to me with this really great idea of it's about time our College of Ed created an online PhD. Knowing that I got mine online from University of Nebraska-Lincoln, we tried to see if we could get something going. And in the process, I learned about cognitive flexibility theory, and started talking to Rand about open educational resources. And what struck me was the idea that a lot of what we're trying to do, especially if you look at Obama's emphasis at the community college level and what we're trying to do to bridge high school and college, is we're kind of looking at these big giant classes that everybody has to take. We're looking for efficiencies in basically e-learning production, which is one way to look at it. So there's this little bit of mindset around creating the one best course that we can then all localize and customize for our current needs. And that's one model. And there's going to be a lot of that, and there already is. And a lot of what open resources are kind of what he would say closed packages of learning. And if you look at like what Carnegie Mellon does, for example, wonderful results, accelerated learning, well, that's a really good example of pedagogy built in, extremely well planned, pre-closed and pre-planned experience for a learner that achieves certain learning outcomes. It's one approach. It's a very effective approach. But there are other ways that I think cognitive flexibility theory kind of points to, which should be, all right, let's assume you had a plethora of resources, which we do if you go to Google or Discover Ed. And what else could we offer people besides pre-structured learning experiences, even if they're small, the size of a lesson or a unit or a topic as opposed to a whole course? What else can we do? It seems like we're applying an old model of instruction based on classrooms and courses to this new environment that is much more flexible. And I was really happy at the conference the last couple days to see examples of widgets and things that are embedded in your browser where you are the learning management system, right? It's coming to you in your browser. You're the window. You're not going to something that's pre-structured with a perfect learning environment aimed at your context and your learning abilities. You're in control. So it's just a different way. Not better or worse, just different. So I think there are some ideas in what Rand has been doing for the past 20 years that can inform what we do with learning objects, packages, learning instruction, the way we can create different kinds of things that are not in a pre-packaged closed environment that can be effective. And where he's found them effective is for accelerating learning in ill-structured domains, which isn't necessarily Psych 101, although I suppose it could be. It's not math, I don't think, unless it's at the higher levels. But
Application of math. Anytime
right.
knowledge touches the real world, aspects of ill-structuredness creep in pretty quickly.
Yeah. So, maybe it would apply to those 20 courses that we're going to create for all people who are seniors in high school and freshmen in community college. But clearly for the kinds of things we're starting to do with open educational resources and sustainability, I see that we would want to start incorporating some of these techniques into browser windows, into our search engines, into how we organize our learning objects for our food safety program, for example. So anyway, that's kind of how I saw it. So I invited Rand to come here to a different type of conference than he's probably been, doing in his career, and explore the world of open educational resources and provide some insights. And we were hoping that by sharing what he's been doing, you might have some ideas and light bulbs might go off and say, okay, here's an interesting way that we could think about doing something in a little bit different way, get out of our typical box, which is, there's a lot of talk about the pre-programmed wonderful package. Maybe there's some new ideas we can try out. So I'm just curious if it sparked any ideas.
I've got a point from the Twitter feed from the next room over.
Excellent.
About wikis. says that wikis allow students to structure their own learning environments, and I think that's useful for bringing in little bits of content from all over. And here's a page I made, you know, with all these contents, and the student can create a new page and link to it from other ones, and it's right there.
What do you think?
I'm for all things built that don't calcify. The key thing is change, rearrangement. They gave us metal water bottles when we got here that said something. Did anybody have them? They said like reuse, you know, a lot of.
Remix, redistribute, reuse.
Right. I mean, it's got to be that way. The knowledge has to be mobile, or it's not going to be sufficiently adaptable to a wide enough range of situations, including situations I didn't get a chance to talk about of peer interaction, collaborative learning, and the like. When I'm asked to write on this topic, since so much of my work has been about individual learning, what I write about is how this kind of mindset and these kinds of knowledge structures make you so much better in groups and allow you, when you are not in a group, which you aren't always, to be able to think like you're in a group, adopt multiple perspectives, and so on, and sort of simulate the properties of collaborative learning in situations where you're not so engaged. But adaptive, flexible, rearrangeable, that's the key. Yeah.
So obviously one of the takeaways is smaller little pieces are sometimes better than big buckets of pieces. One of the talks earlier was referencing a video game where I think in the last year and a half something like 1 million user-contributed levels have been created. And so it strikes me that, you know, given YouTube and the ease with which students can upload video, you know, just using your video example, your 4-frame video, it seems like being able to contribute cases is something that students could get into.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
then they could be discussing in a discussion forum around the cases that they are generating themselves.
Right. And all of those can be tagged in this sort of mini case way, so that in addition to the greater opportunities for situation adaptive recombinability or assembly, it also makes for new people being introduced into the community an easier way to get up the learning curve. If some of those are marked for their greater sort of synecdochal world in a grain of sand quality, you get a kind of new incrementalist logic of sequencing. What we find in our research is if you take the usual approach of starting simple and then incrementally adding complexity, the early simplifications are so powerful that they impede or interfere with the later attainment of complexity. They're what we call seductive reductions. Instead, what we do so that we don't overwhelm or confuse the learner and start with too much complexity, we start with, you know, some of these ideal sort of crossroads cases, synecdoches, and so on, and those have the mindset features of multiplicity, of interconnectedness, of context dependency, so on and so forth, so that you don't have to undo the inappropriate mindset as you go on, but you are incrementally building up. You're just incrementally building up in a different way. But yeah, that's a great idea.
Could be a good idea for the university.
When we look at some of the things that we're doing at MSU, we had some of Rand's graduate students look at the materials that we have, you know, the buckets of things we have already created, collections of PowerPoints, captures of lectures, like very similar to what we have here from the Open Ed 2009 conference, things that are in text, things that are in video, things that are presentation materials, books. We said, okay, do we have the right material where we could assemble them in some free form way? It doesn't all have to be video, like you saw the interface here. And his students said, yeah, the stuff's too big. It's too big. It needs to be deconstructed into some smaller pieces. And we do need a little bit of upfront planning, not a full-fledged instructional design process like we would normally do for e-learning, all right, but a little bit of pre-planning to identify these crossroads examples, which are just stories or examples of things that have multiple ideas in them. Not all the ideas packed into one thing, but kind of like the starter path And then the more variety, the better after that, once you're kind of past this introduction. It's not an oversimplified introduction, it's just a set of things that embody most of the ideas. So that takes a little bit of planning, but that's a lot easier to do than, because you sit down with experts and you get the advice and you're pretty much done in a couple of meetings through a normal process. It's not a full instructional design process, and we're looking forward to doing some experiments this coming academic year where we create some materials using that design process and indeed using students to create more and more of the content and reusing things that come naturally out of what we do as a research university, which is create assets of information as from recordings of things just like what we're doing in the next at Open Ed here.
Just an observation rather than a question. It echoes what David Weinberger was talking about.
You want to use this so they can capture you? Giving me the sign.
Sorry. What you're talking about seems to echo what David Weinberg wrote in Small Pieces, Loosely Joined. It just feels exactly like that.
By the way, I also am doing some writing these days in philosophy of science and arguing for a kind of leapfrog philosophy in the traditional way we do educational psychology and educational technology. The best researchers are doing really, really outstanding research that's in the tech area that's out of date by the time it gets published. I think if you can find some really good thinkers out in the public realm, and I can't think of one that I like more than David Weinberger's two books, Small Pieces, Loosely Joined, and Everything is Miscellaneous, are wonderful. He talks about ill-structured domains and the importance of multiple coding and not seeing it, as we so often have done in the history of education, seeing a case as a case of something. It's really a case of many things. It's miscellaneous, and that's powerful. That's a good thing. That leads to a lot of kinds of adaptive usability that you don't have without it. So, sources of new ideas, if you're, looking for them, I mean, I had already gotten CFT pretty figured out by the time I got to Weinberger a couple of decades later, but some of his examples are great, and I use his books in my courses all the time just to get people thinking out of the academic box. Yeah.
There's I don't know if you've run across a relatively new field. It's usually called integral theory, and then they've got kind of subunits. There's integral psychology, and integral ecology is one that I'm more familiar with. A good friend of mine is involved in this field, and basically it's the same premise. They look for problems that are ill-structured, complex, global warming, localized to a community, and the economics of the community, and the unemployment rate, et cetera, and what the politics are of the area. And then what this field seeks to do is to bring together, bring the resources to bear and the experts to bear from a variety of fields, including psychology and biology and the folks that understand the weather patterns in the area, or whatever the case may be. And as you said, to create a schema of the moment and a schema that helps to solve that problem in that localized area. And I don't think my friend knows about you and cognitive flexibility theory, so I'm going to introduce you to.
Yes, definitely introduce us. Key thing on integration of any kind is that it be a kind of organic unity and a sort of sense of the ancient Greek aesthetic ideal of unity of diversity. You don't want an abstractive integration or reductive integration. If it's problem solving where there's just one problem, it's probably not a solution to any of the problems we've got out there. What you need is an array of problems and what would make each the right problem, and people have to know what values would go along with choosing this one versus that one, because there's always going to be a multiple solution space. There's going to be diversity unified by various strands of interconnection, a balance between unity and diversity that allows you to recognize the options and know why you're picking this option instead of that option, which very often in these real world problem areas will come down to, given such and such set of values, premises, and so on, that's what would make this best. And even though I don't hold those values, I understand why you're saying what you're saying, because I understand what the values would be that would make that the better solution.
Any final questions? Well, thank you, Rand.
Thank you, Rand.
website or send me an email note or whatever. Happy to continue the discussion.